Kevin, you want to share with us?
Yes. Okay. So Prasha Truma discusses all the different materials for the Mishkan and the Mizbeach. And one of the um, issues discussed here is the gold. Let me just read here. Okay, it talks about covering the. Hold on, I'm just trying to find the making the cover. So one of the covers. I don't want to go. I take too much time on the has to be made covered with gold on the inside and the outside. And it says here in the commentaries, a Torah scholar, the outside, his exterior must reflect his interior and midot. And I think uh, we battle with this. It's a lifetime battle with everyone, with most human beings. And to just obviously try be sincere, not be false. And it's just try be genuine person, and say what you mean and mean what you say. And yeah, it's so that's what the gold on the inside of the cover and the outside was the meaning behind it was just to be truthful to oneself and to project the correct image.
Yeah, I think that's an important point. In order to be a proper Torah scholar, your knowledge has to permeate your character traits, where you are not disingenuous and your integrity is both in your thoughts and action. Just interestingly enough, guys, I don't know if you know this, but the Tachash skins. Um, they actually for the outer covering of the Mishkan as a slip cover, and also they used as a slip cover for the holy vessels both. So what are these skins made of? It's actually in Bad Midbar, Numbers chapter 23 verse 22. Because Hashem said he took Israel out of Egypt with the horn of the strength of the Re'ayim. Basically, what it was is it was a large, ritualistically pure animal with a single horn on its forehead and a skin of six different colors that roamed the desert. And they're around, obviously, at that time. Um, and
Almost sounds like a unicorn.
pardon?
Sounds like a unicorn.
It is a
So that
unicorn. It is a unicorn.
Damon,
Wow.
so
That's
that animal had skin in the spiritual game.
yeah, exactly. I've gotten yeah, that's right. Look, they I think they were only around at that time. You also had a worm, a shamir worm, which would split the rocks of the
Yeah.
Beit HaMikdash because you couldn't use weapons of war, and you
Like
put
swords, yeah, yeah,
that
yeah.
special woman. So
Iron.
certain things appear in certain periods of time, according to history. They say the dodo is extinct, but I meet dodos every day, so I don't know about that. Right, let's get busy. Um, they might be extinct because we want to make them extinct, but that's often just from frustration. We've got to accept dodos and just give them a lot of love and attention. All right. Um, let's just go through a couple of issues clearly before we go in the Gemara. So I can understand why all those steps were confusing, and yesterday everybody was exhausted. So Arthur, just you're on mute at the moment because I heard somebody speaking to you in the background. So you can unmute yourself at any time. But I wanted to
Damon, you couldn't have anybody speaking to me in the background. I'm alone. I'm with the dogs and the cat. Nobody's here.
okay, well it
Tina's at
might
work,
have
Jenny's
been
at work, and Nanny's on course.
uh,
So,
okay, it might have been the voices in my head. I have that all the time. It's
okay.
these are the voices that tell me not to kill dodos. But anyway, uh, those are the
Don't kill me. Don't kill me,
no, you're
Damon.
not a dodo. No one on this share is a dodo. The reality is, what happens with the Gemara is it gets quite confusing because it brings so many different issues in a myriad of layers and different cases. And what we're going to do is build case upon case. So, the Mishnah starts off with Rava explaining in the Gemara, look, let's take some simple cases and add layers. initially, what happened was Lance asked a good question and he said, look, how come they getting the Adam Zimmerman reciprocal punishment when they shouldn't be allowed in as witnesses? And the Ritva and Tosfot agrees with Lance that in many cases they wouldn't be. Because what happens is we question the witnesses, especially in a capital case, quite vigorously before we waste the court's time. And we question them separately to see that their stories corroborate. Now, it's possible that they don't corroborate, but it doesn't mean they're excluded as witnesses if they contradict certain things from slightly different vantage points, because they might see things from different vantage points. But if it's testimony which would invalidate one of the witnesses, then it doesn't even come to play. And then if they are inducted as witnesses, the Sanhedrin's job is further questioning so that we get the defendant off a capital case. Now, in a certain cases, we feed this defendant the Bavli treatment, which means the Sanhedrin doesn't kill that person. They basically get what do you call it? Get restrained from being fed or given liquid. Their stomach shrinks, and then they're given barley and a lot of water. Shaboom, and that's how they die. So it might not be a bloody Sanhedrin, but it's certainly a bit of a mess. The reality is, I don't think that automatically happens in capital cases where the person is exonerated. I think it's a case where they're often a technicality, meaning if they commit a sin indirectly, groma, where they tie a person to the pier and they wait for the tide to come in and the person drowns, or they don't get a proper hasroa, which is the warning in terms of that sin is punishable with a particular form of punishment, or even punishable in terms of a general categorical warning against capital punishment. There's two different opinions. I've sent that to you as evidence. The bottom line is the defendant would have to acknowledge that warning and say, I understand the warning, I understand the repercussions, and I'm doing it anyway. And that's fairly unlikely. So in those particular cases, we put the person in a cage. They're then going to obviously have a reduction of food and water to where it's negligible, and then once they're given barley and given copious amounts of water, because they're going to be thirsty and hungry, nature will take its course. But they're not directly doing it. And I thought about, why is that the case? Well, if you want to kill somebody indirectly, well, the Sanhedrin can kill you indirectly, measure for measure. So that aside, the defendant is given every opportunity within reasonable amounts to get off constraints. So the first thing is that Rava would say to you is that Arthur, they admitted as witnesses because they saw the defendant killing such and such a person, and it seems to work out in the preliminary investigations enough that they inducted as witnesses. And they're also told that they need skin in the game. You must know that one of the things we were talking about is stringencies, that this stringency is not like that stringency. Remember, the stringency of a defamer is that they weren't, is that there was a sort of a double punishment, as you know, of money and lashes. But one of the stringencies is that anybody that's going to give testimony, as Tosfot said, needs skin in the game, and they know that it could be done to them what they intend to do to their victim, measure for measure. So what's happened here, Arthur, is they inducted as witnesses, and then the person is sentenced to death. The defendant is sentenced to death. And then a second set of witnesses come and testify against the first set that they could not have been in Jerusalem watching the murder from the Kotel, because the second set said the first set was with them in Tel Aviv. At that particular time, the crime was supposedly going to happen, for example. In this particular case, there wasn't that accusation. Now, Rava's making it more of its subtlety. they were saying that they could view it. And the murder, and the witnesses, second set of witnesses in this case in Rava, saying that they say to the Sanhedrin, hang on, the witnesses were with us, the first set in the West Wing, and we hear about this case, but the murder took place in the East Wing. And we don't think you can see from the West Wing to the East Wing without a telescope or binoculars, and therefore we questioning their legitimacy as to whether this is plausible, because otherwise they're going to put an innocent person to death. And what the Sanhedrin do at that point is they say, all right, if most people can see from the West Wing to the East Wing, then they're not Adam Zimmerman and the defendant is put to death. If if hardly anybody can see from the west to the east, it means that they've obviously manufactured the situation, and therefore the first set of witnesses get the death penalty. Now, I want to ask you guys, why do they get the death penalty and not have the case thrown out of court, Arthur, or anybody else, before we get to the next layer?
I can tell you.
Because they wanted to.
Arthur will go.
No. No, you're good.
No, I didn't actually hear Damon.
No,
I
you
know what's
need
going
the
on.
smicha.
Give it a try, Arthur.
No, basically because he gets it because he lied. Basically, he didn't tell the truth.
Okay, hang
said
on
he
a
was there
second.
somewhere.
Lance put on the group about the Rambam Maimonides that said that the convicted killer gets bread and water until he aches, and then fed barley until his stomach ruptures. We learned from Rav Schottenstein how a different opinion that person is starved of food and beverage, and then given barley, and then given water. So, Lance, they're different opinions. Either way, it goes bang, bang, boom. I think that's the bottom line. Either way.
Snack, crackle, pop.
Either way, don't try this at home.
Don't try this at home, exactly. But that's a whole discussion on its own, how the process worked. Arthur, what were you going to say?
Mhm. No, I'm good. I said what I basically I said he got put to death because he was a
Who's he?
liar, basically.
Who's he?
The guy that died.
No,
The
Arthur.
guy that falsely witnessed.
No, you're missing it. So when you say he, who, the guy
Okay.
that died, I want you to use the right phrase.
Hey, listen. My wife says to me, "Go give the thingamajig over there." Okay, without giving me any direction. Okay, so you need to learn to read me. I'm training you for marriage.
Yeah, I know you're training me for marriage, because when I asked you what did you say, you said never mind. If you don't know how I feel and think, just don't worry
No,
about it.
It's
like
fine.
it's
It's
like,
fine.
yeah, it's fine. Can I go out with the boys tonight? Yeah, it's fine.
Fine.
It's not fun.
Yeah, but Arthur, it's very unfair to throw him in the deep end. You must be very subtle and slow about it.
Yeah. So, Arthur, what you say?
He's getting one in years. He's gone.
What I
Yeah.
want from you guys is proper explanation. So, in other words, not he, the guilty, what I'm trying to say to you is as follows, is that the second set of witnesses heard about the defendant being sentenced to death on the testimony of the first set of witnesses, and said that we were with the set of witnesses in the West Wing, the murder occurred in the East Wing, and we don't think that the conspiring witnesses could have seen that far, and therefore they're putting an innocent defendant to death. If it's found that in fact you can see that far for normal people, the defendant is put to death because it's a reasonable witnessing of a homicide. If they cannot see that far and they say, no, but we've got special eyesight, we're very talented, but you need binoculars or a telescope, the Adams or Mamim are put to death. Why is the case just not thrown out of court?
Because they've got skin in the game.
What, Kevin, do you want to say?
Based on the conviction, unless also based on the conviction, if the defendant had a death sentence from a prior conviction
No, you're
prior
mixing up
to,
issues. We're not even there yet. We're not even there yet.
okay,
So we're starting out with the first case of Rava before we get to complexity. So it's Gavin, the answer is more specific, is that if during the trial the Sanhedrin turns around to the witnesses, the Adim, they're not conspiring yet, and says, listen, where were you when you saw this murder? And where was the defendant? And they say, look, we were in the West Wing and he was in the East Wing. And then they did a test and said you couldn't have seen that far. Okay. Would they be killed as Adam Zummerman, yes or no, Gavin?
No, they wouldn't be. But what they've done is they've gone ahead and said they want to proceed anyway.
No. So what I'm trying to distinguish here is let's distinguish between admission of witnesses within a court case to prior questioning and cross-examination versus official induction and then the witness testimony. At the point where they're at a trial, if the Sanhedrin wants to get this defendant off and says, well, where were you? Where were because the whole job of the Sanhedrin is to try and get this person off, at which maybe the initial induction process doesn't come to this, because you know how many judges are there for a capital case, Gav? You remember?
Capital case.
Yeah.
Well, you have to have at least 3. Or is
You
it
know,
70 something?
no, there's 23.
23, that's right. 23.
Yeah, sure, that's nice. That's a lot.
No, I know it's a big amount.
So for monetary cases and corporal punishment, they're 3. They're 23 for the as far as 71 are concerned. That's for cases of treason and cases of going to war that affect a national level. But it's 20.
That's the great Sanhedrin, man. The 71 is the great Sanhedrin.
Correct. But
this is just the regular Sanhedrin.
yeah,
For
so
capital.
they have to win by a majority of 2. Now that can't occur if there's only 3 judges for a capital case. So for corporal punishment, yes. So for 23 judges, when they stick their heads together, there has to be a majority of 2 outweighing the verdict, not 1. Now, what we are saying is here is they're trying to think of something to get the defendant off the hook. If they found it's indirect, like Groma, obviously there's the barley treatment or the bread and water and then barley or whatever the case may be, but it's going to be a indirect murder, just like he indirectly killed, or he never acknowledged the warning publicly, or he never got warning. So they have another method. But what's the reason? Firstly, will this person get killed or not, these 2 witnesses, for basically not seeing from the West Wing to the East Wing?
Yeah, because they Adam Zommerman.
What makes them Adam Zommerman, Brendan?
Because they're lying or they trying to coerce the court.
No.
Because, like you said, they're not able to see, and yet they said they were able to see.
So this is the distinction I want to make, because this is the error that's Arthur's making and a few of the other guys are making, including yourself, is that in order to qualify as conspiring witnesses, you need a second set to testify against the first set that they were with them in a different place. So when you use Rava's example, also, the Adam Zommerman only get the reciprocal punishment after the verdict has been given to the defendant and between verdict and carrying out the verdict, the sentencing. So between the sentencing and the verdict, in that small window period, if a second set of witnesses come and say that the first set were with them in another place and couldn't have witnessed the crime, only at that point can they get the reciprocal penalty. If we've already carried out the sentence against the defendant in a capital case, the Adam Zimmerman don't get the death penalty. And if the Adam Zimmerman, there's a second set of witnesses, guys, this is very important, that goes against the first set prior to sentencing, before the verdict is carried out. What happens is they do not get the reciprocal penalty, but the charges are dismissed against the defendant. Do you all understand that? The basic timeline, guys?
Yeah. I actually thought that they were. I thought that was part of the conversation already. That the second set was. I thought they were 18 Zorman already. So you got us there. Thank you.
No, I'm not trying to get you. So what I'm saying is, in a case,
I think that's why a lot of people were confused because we did think you had already. I thought you had discussed that already about that.
So if, for example, the second set said, listen, we're very troubled. We know there's no sentencing at this point or verdict against the defendant, but I don't know if you're aware that we heard that the murder took place in the East Wing and the witnesses were with us in the West Wing. And therefore, we don't know if they could have seen that far. If it's prior to the verdict against the defendant, the Adam Zimmerman just have the case thrown out of court, but they don't get the reciprocal punishment. In terms of punishment in the next world, Hashem will know if they got super eyesight or they don't. Only Hashem will know, and they'll be punished accordingly. So the thing of it is, if they come before the sentencing or the verdict part, or the sentence is carried out, it doesn't stick the case against the defendant if normal people can't see from the West Wing to the East Wing. Okay? So that's the first thing to bear in mind. However, if after sentencing, before the verdict's carrying out, the second set have said that the first set were with them in the West Wing and the murder took place in the East, and we could see it's very improbable that you could see that far. The reason they get the death penalty is because at no point do they admit to get themselves off the hook that they were with the second set of witnesses, because it was up to the first set of witnesses to say, listen, in all fairness, we were in the West Wing, we've got great eyesight, we can see to the East Wing, we were with other people, they can corroborate the fact that there was this murder, or maybe they met us there before and we wouldn't have had a chance to go to the East Wing and they didn't view the murder because it took maybe 12 minutes to walk from the West Wing to the East Wing, especially my level of fitness. So therefore, they chatted with us, and when they left, this happened within a second, the stabbing. So we can confirm we were in the West Wing. This took place in the East Wing. And then I don't know what else you have to ask from us in case anybody comes later. So, they have a huge opportunity here, if they care about the defendant, to say, well, is this, we've got good eyesight. I don't know what your protocol is, but, this is what transpired. In other words, transparency and volunteering of all the details of the information would get the defendant off the hook. And since they didn't have enough almost consideration to admit all the facts, then they could be tripped up by their own lack of disclosure. If it happens at an inappropriate time, that other witnesses were on the scene to see the first set in the West Wing. Does that make sense, guys? Lance?
Just let me clarify something. So basically, the witnesses, Aiden's women, they have done two things wrong. Firstly, they got the date wrong. And secondly, they might not have seen it because they were in the West Wing. And from the West Wing, you need to have superhuman vision, which they might not have. So they get off the hook because of the vision thing. Although they were still lying, they're getting off the hook because it wasn't possible to see from where they were.
No, you're wrong on 2 counts, and it's my fault. If you're wrong, it's because I haven't explained it well enough. I'm not blaming you. It could be me. So first thing is, before we add a case of timeline of conviction versus if the person did a separate crime or not, that's Rava's going to bring it as a third point. All he's bringing up to now, that's why I'm building step upon step, is the fact that if there's a set of witnesses that are testifying against the defendant, and they turn around and say, look, we were in the West Wing, we saw this in the East Wing. At that point, had they admitted that detail, Lance, there couldn't have been a second set that testified against them, because what would happen then is the Sanhedrin would turn around and say, all right, listen, let's check if average person could see. And if the average person could see from the west to the east, in that particular case, the defendant is going to get the death penalty for the murder because there are two witnesses against him. If they say no, the average person could not see from the west to the east. And those first witnesses said, but we've got great eyesight, we can see. They don't get the reciprocal death penalty because they're only too happy, the Sanhedrin, to get the defendant off, and they don't want to now kill another two witnesses because there's not a second set at this point that has gone against the first for two reasons. Firstly, they admitted that they were in the west wing to the east wing. And what they should also admit is the fact that at a certain point, either before the murder or during the murder, snake with fur, before or during the murder, that they did see another couple and they had lunch with them in the West Wing. So if all the information is disclosed, there's not suddenly an issue that comes up because what the witnesses need to do is admit all the cases of the fact to also get the defendant off, but not get an innocent person off. In other words, they need to fully disclose. And if they fully disclose, then it's unlikely that the Adam Zimmerman would, a second set would come to the point of the sentence being put against the defendant between the verdict being carried out. This would come to the fore before, because what would happen then is the first set of witnesses would call in the other two people that were with them having lunch in the West Wing. They left, and then they saw a murder in a split second. In other words, it wouldn't get to a point of a verdict being drafted against the defendant. The Sanhedrin would ascertain if it's normal vision or they've got supervision. If they have supervision, the Sanhedrin would simply say, we're not going to convict the defendant on this basis. We might accept you've got supervision. There was an optometrist, but because you're out of the norm, it's a technicality enough to get the defendant off the hook. But the Adim don't get the reciprocal death penalty because this has occurred way before the sentencing of the defendant, before a second set can come in that sweet spot window period before sentencing and verdict carried out, or verdict and sentence carried out, if you get what I'm saying. Do you get what I'm saying, Lance? This is for the timeline. I want you to get that part straight. Kevin, you want to give it back to me?
I can't give it the way you gave it.
No, just in simple.
Okay, so let me just so there
give
were
a stab at it, buddy.
two sets of witnesses. The one actually saw the murder. The other, they were together. They were in the same location, in the west wing of a certain location. And the first set of witnesses actually witnessed the murder. The second set could never have. And even though they were in the same location, because they didn't have that, it's impossible based on their vision and the angle which they may have viewed it or could have viewed it at, made them Adim Zomamim. And
no, we're not
they
saying that. We're not saying that. And guys, it's a pleasure to go through it again. It's a non-issue. Kevin, what actually happened here is what I'm saying is that the base principle is you've got one set of witnesses against the defendant. The second set of witnesses have not come against the first set and said there's a problem with the first set. So the general principle we learned before Rava brings these nuances is the fact that we learn Adim Zomamim, that the second set testify against the first set that they couldn't have witnessed the crime because they were with the second set in a different location. That's your primary simple case. Now Rav is asking a whole lot of questions and saying, look, it's going to become difficult because we're going to bring other factors in. In other words, what happens if they say that the second set did see the first set in the West Wing? Maybe they didn't even have lunch with them. Maybe the first set were not even aware that there was a second set that saw them having food at the diner in the West Wing when they saw the murder of the person in the defense against he was a perpetrator against somebody else in a murder. So all we are saying is here, say I'm having lunch with Arthur in the West Wing of the Kotel. and we see a particular crime, and we say we saw this crime in the East Wing, and we don't even know the other witnesses, but the other witnesses that come later after this defendant is sentenced to a crime. Let's not even say a capital crime. Let's just say whatever, breaking a negative commandment. It doesn't matter what crime. And they say, but hang on, we walked past and we saw Arthur. He's not in Renana because we're from Renana. We saw him having lunch with Damon in the West Wing, and we don't think that they could have seen that far into the East Wing. So the defendant is innocent because it's not possible to see that far. Now, what happens is we get the reciprocal punishment if this defendant is already convicted, but they haven't carried out the sentence yet. Okay? Because this is what we sought to get a defendant punished for, and therefore we give him the reciprocal punishment. If it could be deemed that from us having lunch in the West Wing, we could see, according to most people, what transpired in the East Wing, because it's the vision constraint of most people, and most people could see that far. It's not too far. Then we are not convicted of being conspiring witnesses, and the defendant is made to pay for that transgression that they caused in the East Wing. Because most people having coffee in the West Wing could have seen the distance of the East Wing. So what we are saying is the plausibility of the distance. How can most people say? Can most people see it or not? Now, we can't assume that the first set have to say, oh, no, we saw the second set, because maybe they weren't even aware they're here. They were there to, you can be having lunch with somebody and somebody else sees you from a distance, but you don't know that they've seen you. So what the first set should say to get out of trouble is say, we were in the West Wing, we saw this crime in the East Wing, and what is the protocol? Because we don't want to have an innocent person killed, but we believe we saw this crime. And then the Sanhedrin would say, before they sentence this defendant, let's see if most people can see that far, or if there's any obscurity or anything like that. So it never actually comes to convicting the defendant. Or if the Sanhedrin say, yes, you can see that far, it's reasonable, and therefore your testimony sticks and the defendant is punished for that crime, you're not going to be caught as Adim Zomamim, because the whole reason the Adim Zomamim are caught as Adim Zomamim is a second set of witnesses said, we viewed Damon and Arthur having lunch at this location in the West Wing. That's all they said. And then at that point, we never almost revealed that the crime took place in the East Wing. And if the Sanhedrin can see that it's not possible to see that far, and we've accused this person of breaking, let's just say, a negative commandment to where there were lashes, or they stole somebody's purse, but they couldn't have seen it, we have to pay what we sought to do to that defendant, because the Sanhedrin doesn't want an innocent person to go get punished. Does that make sense? I hope I haven't overcomplicated it. I've tried to keep it as straightforward as possible. So it's the witness's job to have proper disclosure. They don't have to say they saw a second set of witnesses, because if I'm having lunch with Arthur, I might have been on my phone talking to Arthur. Arthur probably was talking to Nadine, Dina, and Danielle on the phone at the same time, half looking at me, half
Leave
looking.
out the word probably.
Okay, so in other words, we might not have noticed walking past two people we know in Renana. They might have just seen us. So what we have to do is disclose information so that we don't get the reciprocal punishment. That's one of the lessons of the Gemara, is that full disclosure, so that the Sanhedrin can use tools at its disposal to not even get the defendant convicted if most people can't see at that distance. Can everybody understand what I'm saying here about how to avoid a reciprocal punishment?
Yeah, it's clear. It's clear now. Thanks. Sorry, I was a bit dopey here, but I've got it
And
now.
Rava's second point was distance. In other words, it wasn't distance of vision. He's saying, listen, it's distance of traveling from point A to B. The first one was a distance of vision or obscurity of vision. The second was a distance that you took an animal and you rode it from point A to B. And if that breed of horse, etc., the average speed is X, and you could have made it to have viewed the crime, and most animals could have gone from point A to B in that breed within that time period of being in a particular city or province in the evening and seeing the crime in the morning. We say if most average people could have achieved it, they're not Adim Zomamim. But if it's near impossible, they are Adim Zomamim. So what the witnesses have to do is assume, Lance, there's a second set of witnesses that will testify against them, and say, listen, in the evening we were in a different province, we took this particular donkey, and we witnessed the crime in the morning, so that they're not caught out after the fact. And it's up to the Sanhedrin to say, well, let's see if this donkey is going to cover the distance. If not, we're not going to give you the reciprocal penalty. The case is just going to be thrown out of court, because the Adam Zimmerman can only be convicted by the second set between the verdict and the sentence carried out. So it's up to them to give the Sanhedrin as much details as possible before the verdict is given. And it's up to the Sanhedrin to have that, because you've got to assume there will be a second set that is going to come to the fore and say, listen, you weren't in the same province. Is this abundantly clear before we go through timeline issues tomorrow?
Yeah, it's clear.
Okay.
Yeah.
So do you see what the Gemara does is it takes the simplest case. Then it starts to add layers. Next time it's going to say exactly like Lon said. What if you got the day wrong? What happens then? You know what I'm saying? So we're throwing different things against Adam Zommerman to find out what's happening in this case. All right, guys, have a good evening. I hope today was clear. I try to build step upon step.
No, you were very clear.
Yeah, cheers.
Cheers, guys.
Yeah, thanks.
Okay.